Hello everyone and welcome, I am FLC, and in this video we're going to be talking about the shooter meta. So, if you've been hanging around any kind of competitive Splatoon players for the last couple of years, you've probably heard something about how every game is just 4 shooters, and it's so boring, and there's no variety or anything like that. And to be fair, they're not wrong. There are a lot of shooters being played in Splatoon 2, and not being able to sort of make use of the variety of weapon choices that the devs have given us for Splatoon 2 is a bit sad. And also, going into Splatoon 3, it doesn't seem like a whole lot has changed. Like, yes, we have things like the squid roll and all that sort of stuff, but realistically, it isn't hard to ask the question, are we doomed? Are we doomed to a 4-shooter meta with a whole bunch of tenor missiles and all that sort of stuff? Well, in this video, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what the shooter meta is, how we got to the point we're at, why we're picking shooters, why shooters are so good, as well as some other contributing factors. So the tenor missiles are here for a reason. And then we're going to sort of put that into context of Splatoon 3. Are we actually going into a new game with the same old meta? Well, let's start with this. What is a meta? Like, we don't really... It's one of those words that just kind of gets thrown around, right? You play any game competitively, or even semi-competitively, like, even just talking casually, there'll be discussions about the meta. What is a meta? What actually is a meta? Well, a meta is the most effective... No, it's not. I'm sorry. This is not true. I don't know where the whole idea of most effective tactic available came from. I'm assuming it's like WoW or Diablo or some PvE game like that. It's not that. The meta is not and was never about the best tactic. Like, one of the whole things in a competitive game is there is no best thing to do. The only thing that you can do is beat what everyone else is doing, and that's what a metagame is. So when we're talking about the metagame, we're trying to think about what is everyone else doing. Okay, so if we're talking about the current Splatoon 2 meta, most teams are picking a bunch of shooters. And that's it, right? And you have a pretty good idea of what they're picking. They're picking Panzer 52, they're picking NZAP, they're picking Jet Squelcher, they're picking Panzershot, right? Like all these various weapons that we already know in advance, right? That is the metagame. So what does the metagame mean for us? Well, it's what we have to win against. That is what the metagame is all about. If you go into a game and you know that the enemy team's team comp, is going to be picking, like they're going to be picking like Custom Jet and maybe a Squeezer and an NZAP and a K-Shot, well, you had better be picking something that's going to do well against that. And that's what the meta is all about. So, naturally, when we talk about the meta, we're not talking about the best weapons. You don't have to pick these weapons. You can do well against those weapons using a whole range of options. But the point is that they're going to be what you're fighting, and you had better be good at fighting them. Especially in a competitive setting. Now, something that's really important to understand here is that a meta is not exclusive to competition. And I don't mean that the competitive meta affects everything else. I mean every context that you play the game in has its own metagame. A B rank lobby has its own metagame. And that metagame is based on the fact that in order to advance from C rank to B rank, you basically... The players who are going to be doing that are the ones who at least understand the basic idea of the objective. Right? They're going into splat zones and they know they have to paint the square. They're going into tower control, they know they have to stand on the tower, that kind of thing. So those players separate themselves from the people who are painting walls and basically, you know, the 3-year-olds who are basically just doing whatever the hell. And they get into B rank. Now, that means that B rank is mostly populated by people who just have a rudimentary understanding of how the objective works, so they're just going to run straight to the objective and start doing it. Which means that the thing that you do to win against that is basically you run around shooting people, because everyone's going to be just beelining to the objective. So if you flank them, they're not really going to be watching for it, and it's going to be really easy to just get away with it. You just run in, you get some kills, and And great, okay, cool, you made it to A rank. Now, A rank is full of the people who were doing the same thing that you were, right? And also some other people too, sure, but... So you can sort of see how a meta kind of develops even in non-competitive contexts like low-level ranked. And the same thing is true in high-level. People pick things with the idea that they're going to win, and then eventually those things become popular, and so now it's your job to beat the popular thing, right? That's how metagames work. So, what's the state of Splatoon 2? Well, when you ask a competitive player, you'll get answers such as, oh, well, missiles are overpowered, you know, you can just run a jet scorcher and get 12 missiles and you'll win the game. You know, everyone just uses 4 shooters. It's really boring. You need armor. You can't win a game unless you have armor. And also, there's people who say things like Ken's 52 gal is fatherless. I wouldn't know anything about that, but it's something that the kids say, you know. So anyway, that's the state of Splatoon 2 right now. You can understand why people are maybe a little bit sick of it, and are hoping that Splatoon 3 is going to give us something new. And just to sort of emphasize the point here, we've got a couple of games from some top Japanese competition. So these are some fairly recent tournaments, like in the last month or two. So this is Zone Cup winners. This is a game from the finals on Gobi Arena Splat Zones, and as you can see, 2 missiles on each team. So you've got a vanilla jet, and you've got a Kenza shot on both teams, and then both teams also have the NZAP for the armor. And then the difference is, of course, the sort of third special, which is on the left side you have bubbles from the foil squeezer, and on the right side you have a Kenza gal. So, by and large, very similar team comps, 4 shooters, lots of missiles, yada yada yada. It would seem things are confirmed. Well, not so fast, because this is also from a finals, and this is not 4 shooters versus 4 shooters. This is 3 shooters and a charger versus 3 shooters and a splatling, which, splatlings are pretty close to being shooters, but they're still some significant differences, and this is where, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, there's a big caveat to this image, which is that this is on Schellendorf Institute. Now, this is zones, of course, but you can imagine Schellendorf, missiles aren't quite as effective there, for the simple reason that a lot of the time players are going to be underneath the glass, which means that they're not going to be able to get hit by them, so people pick other things, right? But still, lots of shooters, and maybe not so many missiles, but definitely a lot of suction rushes. I mean, we're seeing a lot of the same specials, and obviously the armor as well. And then we've got Rainmaker Cup. So this is obviously, we see, as we would expect, 1 Stingray, 2 Stingray, 3 Stingray, 4. Yeah, I mean, it's exactly what you would expect. This is an inkjet splash, by the way. This is quite a common thing in Japan. Inkjet is considered one of the stronger Rainmaker specials for its ability to basically just defend really easily and also really quickly attack. And then, of course, you've just got a smattering of the usual mainstays. So it would seem that in the top level of Japanese competition, we are, in fact, seeing a ton of shooters. A ton of shooters, a ton of the same shooters, a ton of the same specials. It's all... I mean, it seems as though people's complaints are founded, but... Wait a minute. I was just in solo queue the other day, you might say to me. I personally wasn't in solo queue the other day, I haven't played it in 6 months. But you might say to me, I was in solo queue the other day, and there was this Tri-Slosher. Now, Tri-Sloshers aren't a shooter, but he was getting like 20 kills. He was just going nuts. That's not a shooter, but he's doing so well. Or you might say to me, well, but FLC, I picked Gluga, and then I would stop you and say, no, don't talk to me. So what is the Splatoon 2 meta? In X rank, we have usage stats. So basically, in X rank, things are a little bit different. A little bit. Only a little bit. And you see these stats right here. So this is the top 500 from July. This is the usage rates for the top 500 in all modes. So basically, if someone made it to the top 500, their main weapon is counted and counted up, and then this is the result that comes out. So these are the top 10 weapons. Which, by the way, you can see this for yourself. There's a link underneath the in the caption there, and also I will post a link in the description. So these usage stats would seem to indicate that, well, yes, there are a lot of shooters, but there's also a couple of non-shooters. We see a tri-slosher. Some people surprised we see a carbon deco, and we also see a soda slosher. And yeah, so there's only 3 of the top 10 that aren't shooters here, but if you actually go to the top 20, turns out that actually half of them are not shooters. So hang on, there's a bit of a mismatch here. There's a mismatch between solo queue, even at highest levels of solo queue in the top 500, and then competitive, where you aren't really seeing things like carbon deco and tri-slosher. Well, actually, sorry, you do see tri-slosher just fine. It's just that it's usually only picked on like Black Belly, for example. But things like carbon roller and even soda don't really tend to get picked very often in competitive. So why is that? So, well, to answer that, we got to actually understand why we're picking shooters in the first place. So let's do the classic thing when you're figuring out why something's good and you just list all of its strengths, right? So why do we want to pick a shooter? Well, it has fast movement. Shooters tend to have really fast movement. Now, I mean, when I say fast movement, I mean there's very little delay between when you shoot and when you can move again. The only exception to this is the H3. The L3 has a delay as well, but it's not it's not a particularly long delay. So basically shooters can just take a shot and then move, take a shot, move, take a shot, move. So that's really, really effective. It basically just means you're constantly on the move, you're really hard to hit, you're always moving to the place you need to be. This is as compared to something like a range blaster, where if you want to take an accurate shot, you have to basically stand there for a full second while you're animation locked. You're also your weapon also has really efficient ink usage. So what that means is, again, you're only taking the shots that you need to. So when and those shots are pretty cheap, right? So you can shoot your 3 shots with your 10 attack, do your lethal damage, and that's only about 4% of your ink tank or something like that. Now, obviously, there are some thirsty weapons in the upper echelons of the range, as far as range goes. So things like 96 scale is pretty thirsty, and Pro is also pretty thirsty as far as main weapons go. But even then, they're kind of okay, right? They're certainly nowhere near as thirsty as something like a Dynamo. So, along with that, you've got pretty good turfing. Now, again, you have some exceptions to this. Things like the Pro and to a lesser degree the 96, also things like the Squeezer, don't have the greatest don't have the greatest turping, but it's still kind of okay, right? Like, you can still paint an acceptable amount. So painting is obviously useful for the sort of perp control aspect, but also because you get your special a lot faster. So if you're playing an N-Zap and your N-Zap has, I don't know, 180p missiles or whatever it is on the orange Zap, then you're probably going to get that a lot faster than a Grim Range Blaster. Same special, and I don't even remember what the points are for special on those 2 weapons, but you're getting a lot more missiles with an orange Zap than you are with a Grim Range Blaster, and it's largely because the orange Zap just paints better. The other thing is multi-kills. So the reason I say multi-kills as opposed to kills is because, to put a long story short, you generally want to have a 2-player advantage in this game before you really start any kind of pushes. The reason for that is because basically a 4v3 is still pretty tenuous, like the enemy team can always bounce back, but a 4v2 is about where things start to get a bit more decisive. Now, why do we want multi-kills? Well, on one hand, yes, you can just have your team get 2 of those kills at the same time, but it's often a lot easier to just have one person get those 2 kills, because that one person is like the one person the enemy team overlooked. There's a whole bunch of reasons why it ends up being that way, which I'm not going to go into here because I would like this video to eventually end, but the basic idea is multi-kills matter. Now, let's just do a little bit of an example here. So let's say there's a target here, and there's a target here, and there's like a wall. Alright, so maybe this is the middle of Kelpdown, so there's like a wall in the center here. So you shoot this guy with any weapon you choose. And meanwhile, as you're shooting this guy rounds the corner. Okay? So let's say, let's say you're here, and you have an E-liter. Okay, so your first shot is instant. You basically just instantly kill this guy. But then this guy appears, and you've still got to charge your weapon. So this guy is now running towards you, and oh geez, I'm an E-liter, I have to run away. Okay? Same thing goes for say a range blaster. You kill this guy, and yeah, it takes about 2 seconds, because maybe you don't direct him on the first shot. And then his friend comes in from behind you, and suddenly you're trapped, and there's not much that you can really do aside from pray that you hit your 180 direct, which, spoiler alert, you probably won't. So, then we go to shooters, and well, let's put it this way. This guy is dead in like less than half a second, and then by the time that his friend comes around the corner, you're able to actually turn and fight them. Right? So this is where the fast movement, the efficient ink usage, and all of that comes into play, because all of these shooters tend to have fairly fast kill times that are also very easy to just repeat. Like, you just kill one guy, and then you instantly turn to kill the next guy. This is really, really, really important. So, unlike the times where we usually, we just want to see where something's strong and we just list out all of its strengths, we're also going to look at some of the weaknesses of shooters. So, while shooters have very fast movement, they also need a lot of turf to move around in. Because their whole kit relies on the idea of swim straight, and basically you're in your own turf, so you can cancel your shots and move and swim and start shooting again, all that sort of stuff. You need a fair amount of turf to move around in, and it can't just be like the turf that you're swimming through to get from A to B. If you compare that to something like a blaster, generally speaking, a blaster only needs to take 2 shots. So basically, you jump, you shoot, you swim, you jump, you shoot, right? And when you make a shot, you put a big puddle of ink at your own feet, which means that you can just swim in that, right? It's just immediate. As you're fighting people, you immediately paint the turf that you need to move around and shoot them with. A lot of weapons are like this, and shooters generally are not. This does reduce the amount of movement options that the shooter has. The shooter's still really good at setting up the stage so that you can use the movement to its fullest, but you do actually need to set it up, whereas a lot of weapons you don't. And there's also stuff like dualies that just don't care, right? Then there's efficient ink usage. Well, yes, but each shot is also much less powerful. So as much as it's nice to be able to just shoot 3 shots and only use 4% of your tank, a dynamo shoots 1 shot, and yeah, it's 20% or something, but that one shot is pretty powerful. It's like a 1 shot. It has charger range turfing. There's a lot you can do with that 1 shot. It paints half of a zone by itself, that kind of thing. So there's much less power on shooter shots compared to something like a dynamo flick, or even something like umbrella shot, right? And then, yes, shooters have good turping, but they don't have burst output. Now, what is burst output? Burst output, think of a suction bomb going off, or a dynamo flick, or a tent shot, or anything that just puts a ton of paint in one place, in one go. Okay? So, why is that important? Well, in splat zones, for example, if you want to cap the zone, yes, you could have a junior just stand there and shoot 10 million shots to paint the zone eventually, or you could throw 2 bombs. And those 2 bombs will go up at basically the same time and paint most of the zone in one go. And because the zone works on basically just, as long as you painted 75%, the zone's yours now, you're much more likely to hit that 75% threshold with burst turfing than you are with constant turfing, which is what the shooters do. So that's a really important consideration, because that means that shooters need things like specials and bombs to reliably and quickly and efficiently cap a zone. And then the other thing with, so even though shooters are really good at getting multi-kills, one thing they do need is line of sight. So again, going back to that example that I had with, the shooter who's behind the wall, let's say that you're a slosher. So let's just put this back up here. So if I'm here, I'm killing an enemy here, there's a wall here, and his friend is here. If I'm a slosher, let's say I actually kill this guy quickly and this guy's still behind the wall. I can actually just go up to this wall and slosh over it and kill him, right? A shooter can't really do that. You can go for fall off, it would be dumb to do that. Let's just put it that way. So you need to actually wait until you can see the guy, so you need him to be here before you can shoot him. A lot of weapons are like this, things like chargers, but things like rollers and sloshes and all that sort of stuff are quite happy to fight someone over a wall. And that is a really important aspect of those weapons. And in fact, if you can't reliably do this on a map where there is a wall, like there are a lot of walls that you can shoot over to kill people without having to actually see them, then the strength of weapons like blasters and sloshes and whatnot goes down quite substantially. So, those are all the basics. How does this all stack up in competition? Well, basically, it all comes down to speed. In competitive games, things move a lot faster. And I mean a lot faster. So, think about what I was saying about how shooters can take a shot and then move, and then take a shot and then move. The concept I'm referring to here is downtime, okay? A lot of weapons have a large amount of downtime just in their everyday use. If you shoot a pain machine, for example, you're just sitting there, like you've shot your shot and you're stuck. You can't swim, you can barely move, you can't like recover ink, you can't use a sub or anything like that. You're just stuck in the animation. Shooters do not have this problem, well, the H3 does, but they don't have this problem. So downtime is things like animation locks, but it's also things like recovering ink. If you have a weapon where you're expecting to have a lot of, so think of Flingza, for example. Flingza is actually relatively efficient, but the problem is that its playstyle revolves around a high uptime turfing output, which means that eventually you're going to run out of ink, and when you do, you have to stop, and you have to sit there and recover ink, which means your turfing goes away. Which means the whole thing that you picked your weapon for goes away. That doesn't make Flingza bad, it's just a reality of playing Flingza. Another source of downtime that I didn't list here is things like charge times. So, for example, a Splatling has a charge time. During that charge time, yes, you can start shooting, but you're not going to have particularly good shots. Charges, again, same deal. Even things like dualies, they don't actually have a charge time, but the fact that you quite often have to roll to make your weapon any good is... It is downtime, right? The whole point of downtime is that it's time that you're not really doing anything useful. And also, not only are you not doing anything useful, but chances are you're not able to actually... So, for example, with shooters, you may have downtime, but the downtime is going to probably... Like, you can line it up so that it coincides with the time you're trying to move around the map. Right, like you're trying to. So say you're at the elbow of Humpback, right? So you're at the elbow of Humpback, which sort of looks a bit like this. So you're moving up through here. So you've just sort of shot and maybe you're throwing a sub, but the whole time you're moving through here around this elbow section, up into the enemy plat, you're recovering ink this whole time, right? So it's a lot easier to just have your downtime line up with the times where you're moving around. Now, if competition makes things faster, you can start to see how these sorts of things matter a lot more. When you have, like when you're just playing sort of casually or even low X rank, right? A lot of this downtime doesn't matter as much because, quite frankly, the game doesn't move very quickly. But the faster you play the game, the more this starts to matter. So, why does downtime matter? Well, there's things like trading. There are resource limitations. You have to respond quickly to developing situations. And so, there's the point of versatility. Now, I'm going to explain all these in one, but just we're going to use some picture aid here. So, trading. Why does downtime matter in trading? Well, let's talk about trading. A trade is basically, you can imagine it like this. There's a player here, and you're standing here. You start shooting at him, but then his friend comes out from behind here and starts shooting at you, right? So his friend is back here, comes out from behind the cover here and starts shooting at you. Now, regardless of whether you get this kill or not, this guy is now threatening you, and you'll probably die. So you've killed this guy, but his friend has come in and killed you. That is a trade. Now, Imagine this situation with a bunch of different weapons. So imagine you're a K machine, okay? So you start shooting at this guy, he starts to run away, so you have to move forwards a little bit, so you're here, and you shoot him and he dies right here. The problem is, during this time, you've been animation locked here, and you've been animation locked here, which means that this guy has a lot more time to come in and shoot at you. And not only that, but when he does shoot at you, you're also going to be standing still, or more or less. Like, you can jump and move around and whatnot, but you're still you're still a sitting target, as far as the game's concerned. So, what that means is high downtime, or when you have downtime as part of your weapon, it's a lot easier for people to come in and clean up your fights. So, what about resource limitation? Well, sorry, getting ahead of myself. What about with shooters? Well, if you're fighting this guy, firstly, you can probably just kill him outright because your weapon kills so quickly, but even if you don't, every time you move, or every time you take a shot, you can move. So even if this guy, from coming in from the right-hand side, is actually going to threaten you, at any time you can recognize that he's there. So if this guy's retreating this way, you can actually fight from here, and you will break the line of sight of this guy. So what do I mean by that? Well, what I'm saying is, this guy's going to run away because you've just gone on him. But then you're going to be able to switch targets because you have a shooter that can do that, and you're going to be able to really easily take the fight to this guy. So you actually block the trade attempt and you turn it around on its head while this guy's trying to run away. This is something that happens all the time in competitive. I mean all the time in competitive. A K machine can't do this because a K machine relies on people already having taken damage, basically. If you try to fight this guy when he's already basically on top of you as a K machine, you literally can't kill him. You don't do enough damage to kill him. So he's just going to be able to walk up and shoot you with basically no fear. Yeah, maybe you'll direct him, but he's going to kill you before you get your next shot off. With a shooter, that's not the case, because you can actually turn and kill him really, really quickly. Likewise, if you're a roller, it's the same problem. Over here, you might be able to get the vertical flick and kill this guy in one shot, but then, because you've gone for the vertical flick, and this is where the resource limitations come in, you have no ink. You've just used your burst bomb combo as a carbon roller or whatever, so you have no ink to actually turn around and fight this guy with. So, on the subject of resource limitations, what I mean by resource limitations is basically like everything from ink to more abstract things like time. If you do get this kill, right? So let's say you're here and you get this kill, and there is no trade. Like the enemy team's just left this guy in mid all alone somehow. I don't know any situation where that would actually happen, but let's just say that's happened. This guy's going to be off the map for 8 seconds. Right? 8 seconds. Which means you have 8 seconds to make something of the fact that you've taken this guy out. Now, if we think about how long it takes to actually shoot something like a range blaster or a dynamo, that 8 seconds isn't really a long time. But with a shooter, you can move around, you can get another couple of kills, you can paint half the map, all of that can easily happen in 8 seconds. You can very easily turn this into a situation where, rather than being all the way back here, maybe you're all the way up here and you have a special, right? It's much easier to do this in the limited time that you have as a shooter than it is with something like a range blaster. You can get more out of a small timing window than most other weapons can. So what about response time? Well, okay, let's say you're over here painting on the left-hand side. Maybe you're an NZAP and you're painting for armor. And suddenly you get the call, oh hey, there's a guy behind the left stack. If you're a range blaster and you're painting this, I don't know why you'd be painting this as a range blaster, but if you're a range blaster, what's going to happen is you're going to be taking a shot, and you're going to be swimming up, you're going to be taking a shot, you're going to be swimming up, and by this point, this guy's already over here somewhere. With an NZAP, you're painting this guy, you're painting this, oh hey, there's a guy behind right stack, and you just go. You're just in, right? It's very easy to just very quickly stop what you're doing and go straight to where you're needed. And again, this is all down to the fact that these weapons have really low downtime. It's really easy to just quickly drop whatever it is you're doing and just go and do something else. Now, versatility is an interesting one. When I say versatility is another one of those terms that, again, people kind of just use and don't really have any meaning behind. When I say versatility, I'm talking about how in Splatoon, generally speaking, you only need solutions to your problems to be good enough. Now, okay, so let me put it like this. If there is like a Hydra sitting here, as Hydras quite often do on this map, or like an E-Leader or something, this is a really common spot for anchor players to sit. Your solution does not need to perfectly remove the Hydra. It just needs to work. So what that means is, it doesn't matter whether the Hydra dies to a bomb, or to 3 perfectly placed missile launches, or to 3 Stingrays, or to an E-Leader that you specifically counterpicked it with. It just has to die. And however it dies, it doesn't matter, because it's dead. Right? You just need the effect. It doesn't matter how you get there. So, shooters, by and large, owing to a lot of these things, shooters, by and large, have tools to approach any situation and deal with any situation. Or more specifically, non-shooters usually have situations that they are just not remotely equipped to deal with. And this is a little bit of why. Skill means speed. So what I mean here is, in high skill games, the game is faster. So I already said that. Now what do we actually mean here? So the way I usually visualize this is with timing windows. So you can think of a timing window. This isn't the literal meaning of a timing window, but you can think of it this way. A timing window is how long you have to stand still before someone will just shoot you. Okay? So if you're playing, say, low X rank or something, you might be able to stand in front of the zone for like 2 or 3 seconds before someone tries to do anything about you. In competitive games, in competitive games, it's going to be less than half a second. Okay? In other words, the time that you spend standing in front of the zone just painting it is going to, the amount of time that you have to do that before someone just shoots you is dramatically shorter. So more specifically, when I say timing windows, the actual definition is something more like how long it takes for an average action to play out, right? So how long the fight takes to play out, how long it takes for someone to put the paint they need down onto the map, how long it takes for someone to rotate or decide to rotate, that kind of thing. So, and obviously there's going to be things that take more than half a second in a high-skill game. But what I mean is, basically any given fight, any given engagement is going to be over and done with in half a second. Either people are going to have retreated, or they're going to have, one of them's died, or both of them have died, or whatever. Everything is over and done with in less than half a second. So, one way that you can... now, obviously, where we're going with this is that shooters get a lot more out of this than other weapons, but one thing, if you've ever played against, say, a really high-skill player, say you're low X rank or S plus or something, and you play against someone who's just really, really good. You can tell they're just way better than everyone else. This is probably how what you've been seeing, okay? So, there'll be this player who is just all over the place. No matter where you go, this player is just there. You kill them, and then suddenly, you can barely do anything before they're back on the map killing you. Every time you see them, they're killing you instantly. There is no time to react, no time to do anything. They kill someone on the left-hand side of the map, so you think, oh, maybe I can come in and help them, but then they're flanking you from the right even before you've actually got there, right? That is what I mean by the timing windows being shorter in high-level games. These players are playing faster. They're doing things more quickly, more efficiently. So as you can imagine, shooters are probably going to thrive here. Now let's talk about speed limits. Every weapon has a speed limit as to how fast they can act in this context I've just been talking about, right? Now we've already kind of gone into this a little bit. We talked about the cane machine. A lot of this speed limit comes down to the animation lock. So with shooters, there basically isn't one, so the speed limit is virtually meaningless, right? There is a speed limit for shooter that's like 2 frames, some noise like that. It's like, what, 5 frames for most shooters, and like 4 for like Splash and whatnot. You know, it doesn't matter. The point is, it doesn't matter, because that is a pointless number of frames. Whereas, if you think about something like a sloshing machine, and I actually pulled the numbers for this, sloshing machine has a 34 frame animation, which is a bit less than 0.6 seconds. Now, keeping in mind what I just said about how basically in a really high level game, you got about half a second of just standing still or standing kind of still before someone just shoots you. You got, hang on, half a second before someone shoots you. But pressing the right trigger takes 0.6 of a second. I think we have a bit of a problem. So, this is where shooters really shine. In high-level games, most non-shooter weapons, have an animation lock that is simply too long to actually fit into the game anymore. Things like, so just think about the kill time on a lot of these shooters. A K-Gal will kill you in 2 shots. That's like 10 frames or something like that. Right? 10 frames is a third of the time that it takes for a sloshing machine to go through its animation. Like, think about that. That means that a K-Gal can shoot like 6 shots. It can miss 4 times and still kill a K-machine before it's even finished shooting once. It can miss 4 times. It can have a 33% accuracy rate and still outfight a K-machine, which, by the way, people still for some reason think that K-machines count as shooters, which it just doesn't. Not at this level. It does at your low level games where people are just whiffing all the time and whatever. But in a high level game where you can reasonably expect people to hit their shots and also not take dumb fights, the K-machine has a bit of a problem. And it is not a problem that skill can fix. It is a hard problem locked into the game. It gets worse, because skill also means movement. To this point, you might be thinking to yourself, well, hang on a minute. I can go into the firing range and I can shoot a dummy in like 3 shots. Like I can just do 1, 2, 3 dead with a T-Tech, and I can kill a dummy in like less than 0.15 a second or whatever. So why haven't I seen this? Why haven't I got to a point where I'm at the half-second mark? Well, the problem is movement. Obviously, hitting your weapon's speed limit is really easy against standing targets. You can just go into the range, 1, 2, 3 dead against every standing target, no trouble at all, even if you're like an A rank. That is not difficult. You may notice that switching targets from one to the other may cause some problems, but for the most part, you're just going 1, 2, 3 dead, 1, 2, 3 dead, 1, 2, 3 dead. Easy. The problem is, high-level players are also way more mobile. Not only are high-level players not just randomly standing still and just making themselves easy targets to anyone who they don't see, they're also moving much more unpredictably. They're moving much faster. They're making better use of the terrain. They're getting into more obnoxious positions in the first place, so they're harder to shoot at. Right? All of this increases how much time it takes for you to actually do anything, which means, let's say that if we were able to boil someone's skill down, and we kind of are actually, to like just how long their timing window is. Can they play at 1 second intervals, or are they playing at half-second intervals, or are they playing at like 0.3 second intervals? What limit are they at? Well, if they're playing against a high-level player or high-level team, that timing window is going to be larger, right? They're going to take longer to do any given thing. All of their fights are going to take longer. And that includes at a low level of play. So like if a mid-level player who's dunking on NA solo queue comes into a lobby fighting against FT Win, suddenly they're going to be whiffing all their shots. They're going to be having trouble actually finishing their fights. And they're going to feel like, oh, I'm playing so badly. But no, they're not playing badly, they're just playing against people who move. Right? And so it feels bad, sure, but they're not playing any differently. They're just playing as people who can actually counter what they're doing. So what this means is, the more mobility you have, the more the enemy players miss, and that means the longer they take to fight you, which, going back to the whole thing of like trading and limitations on resources and all that sort of stuff, the longer they take to fight you, the harder the game gets for them, because now your friends are going to be able to come in and help. If you're able to live through all your fights, then suddenly you're not respawning every time we try to make a push. You're actually living. Maybe you live on 20 HP, but you're still living. That means you get more specials. It means you're in more forward positions to actually take more parts of the map sooner. All of these things snowball and compound on top of themselves. This is why every time you fail to finish your plate when you're fighting somebody, it always feels so much worse on the defense, right? Because suddenly you failed to get a kill, so that means that they've got one more person who has a special and is in a forward position who can just push your base. Not only that, but the best players are also better at handling enemy movement. So not only are the best players already playing at a faster interval than most others, they're also less affected when the enemy players start to bamboozle them with movement. Like someone who's playing at a 0.3 interval probably only goes to a 0.5 against a really good player. It's still a lot, it still dramatically affects the outcome of games, but it's enough to the point where they can still reasonably expect to do pretty well. Okay? So, the higher skill the lobby is, the faster it plays out, and also the harder it is to play in when you have mobility issues, either because of skill or because of your weapon's downtime. Right? So in other words, it's not just that shooters have faster mobility and whatever, and better at trading and better at multi-kill and all that sort of stuff. It's that the other weapons, like, they're also less punished in this situation. So, to put it all together, high-level games are very, very fast-paced compared to what you might be used to in ranked. High-level players are really hard to hit, and they're also really good at hitting hard shots. Their interval is smaller, and they make other people's intervals bigger, if we want to put it like that. Accuracy translates directly to speed, because the shots that you miss are the shots that increase how long your timing window is, your interval is, right? So if you can hit more shots, especially against moving targets and against difficult to hit opponents, and at longer ranges, you're going to play faster. And this is where the fast pace comes from. People are finishing their fight sooner, they're hitting more shots, and they're more decisive in what they do and all that sort of stuff. Shooters get the most benefit from this because they have the most to gain in terms of improving their kill times, and they're the least punished because missing only punishes them by a couple of frames, right? In terms of, like, oh, I'm like with the K-Gal versus the K-Machine example. The K-Gal only needs to hit 2 shots, but the timing window is so large against the K-Machine that they actually have time to shoot like 6 shots, which means they can just whiff half, like, 2/3 of their shots and still probably come out on top. But we're not done. We're not done, because we're not just talking about shooters here. We don't live in a vacuum. Splatoon 2 is not a vacuum. There are other factors as well. So let's talk about missiles. So when this special was announced, they said missiles are coming back. There were groans heard around the world. I mean, there were like Japanese players live reacting who were just like, oh, why? And I mean, you know, we see things like this where people are spamming missiles and not really fighting, and they're getting, you know, we're seeing, what is this, like over 40 missiles in one game, which is, what, 400 individual missiles at the very least. And, I mean, like, just look at this. Just look at this. Like, this is from Zone Cup winners. I think this was actually one of the screenshots that I took. I think this is the Gobi Arena game. And I mean, it's awful. Like, it's... Look at this. They're getting like 40 missiles, and then between the 40 missile users, there's like, what, 18 kills? Well, 18 assists, more specifically. So out of 400 missiles, at the very most out of 400 plus missiles, like individual missiles, only 18 of them actually did meaningful damage to the enemy team. Like, you see why people were maybe a little bit, you're just spamming missiles the whole game, and you're not even hitting anyone with them, but it still works because of how obnoxious they are, right? Okay, but I've just said they're really obnoxious, and they're not getting kills, but they're still winning. Like, what's going on here? How does this all work? Basically, as much as downtime matters, specials matter even more. Consider a situation where you've got a game where everyone's hitting their shots, right? You're playing against squeezers who just instantly hit, tap, 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 dead. No matter where you come from, they will see you, they will shoot you. You're playing against K-Gals that kill you in less than like a 20th a fifth of a second, not a 20th of a second, jeez. Less than a fifth of a second, K-Gal will kill you. Something to that effect, I don't even know. How are you going to break through that? Well, you need specials. The point of a special is basically to disrupt what the enemy team's doing. Disrupt the enemy team's setup is basically like, the enemy team's got you in spawn, there's the anchor is in some obnoxious position you can't possibly deal with, you've got an unspecified number of people sharking in the general vicinity of your base, you don't really know where they are. So what do you need? You need information. You need to know where the enemy team is. You need kill threat. You need to basically say to them, move or you will die. You need objective threat, which is basically, if I can't kill you, I can at least get the objective out of your hands, and you have to go back and deal with that. Right? You need one of those three things. Ideally all three. So, if the enemy team isn't like actively feeding and running into your base and just giving you freebies, you need specials to deal with them. And this is where we get the concept of initiation. So, to initiate with a special, the key thing that you need is range. So, the reason for that is basically, and we'll take a look at this in a little bit of detail here. The higher skill your lobby is, the more contested area there is, which I'll explain in a second, the less information you have about where the enemy team is, and the greater the enemy team's awareness is of what you're doing and what you're likely to do. So let's go through this. So let's think about Snapper Canal here. In your ranked games, you've probably played against people who, maybe there'll be someone camping right here, or there'll be someone who's trying to fight you right here, or someone coming through the flank when you're coming out of spawn, all that sort of stuff. None of this works in high-level games. Instead, what you'll actually see is positions more like this. If you're coming out of your base, you might be starting from here, or from here, or from here. Right? This is about this is about as far out as you'll actually go before you try to retake. Likewise, the enemy team, the defending team, will be probably sitting back here, or they'll be sitting back here, or there'll be someone sitting on this little aircon unit over here, or maybe maybe the fourth guy will be like hovering around here and just like watching the flank, that kind of thing. All of this area between the teams is contested area. Basically, the idea is if anyone is caught in this area, they will immediately be shot by about 10 people. Because this is the area that both teams are actively monitoring, actively contesting, actively shooting at in order to get turf, in order to get specials, and they're probably going to be looking in this general direction when they're trying to push out. So think about this: if the team in spawn is trying to take the zone, even though this is the TC version of the map, what's going to happen is they're going to basically throw a whole bunch of specials in this direction, and if you're caught in like this area, I know it's probably hard to see when I've already scribbled all over everything, but if you're caught in the general vicinity of where they're going, you're probably just going to die. You're not really going to be able to shark very easily. Not only that, but if you think about this guy, right, this guy over here, a lot of players in your ranked games will be like actually in the flank. So you come out of spawn, you go up here or something, and you're like, hang on a minute. But then you're not really coming out of here, are you? You're going straight to snipe in ranked games, which is why this works. You're not actually checking the flanks. Well, in high level competition, they do check the flanks, as you would hope. Which means if you're stuck in this flank and the jet scorcher comes up here, you're probably just dead. So you have to actually be all the way back here. Likewise, if you're here and the enemy team activates missiles from like here, like this Jet Scorcher has just covered this flank, and they're painting a special, activate missiles. Oh hey, look at this. And then the Squeezer jumps down and kills you, right? And then this immediately opens up the map because now they know where you were, and they know that there's a big body hole where you're, like, instead of being back here like you're supposed to be, you actually moved up here, which means this is now a weak area of the map for you, which means that you can just barrel straight in. On that note, there's also the factor of information. So again, going back to here, if you're all the way back on this aircon unit, the enemy team, the team coming out of spawn, has no real way of knowing that you're going to be coming out on the flank. They can only just guess, right? If you're sitting back here, even if they kind of know that you're in this area, they can't actually see you. Like, you can be painting even, and they just won't see you. They'll be able to sort of guess, oh, well, you're in this general vicinity because you're painting. Sure, but they won't actually be able to put eyes on you. And likewise, the reason why on the defending side of things, or sorry, on the spawn side of things, the reason why you don't walk out on a snipe is because this guy is anticipating that someone's going to walk out on a snipe, and he's just waiting for the moment where he can just poke his head out and shoot this guy in the face. And that's what I mean by the awareness, right? These players, every single one of these players, all 8 players on the map, are more aware of how the map plays out and what to expect. They're better at hiding the information that they're giving to the enemy team. And on top of that, it's so much harder to even set foot out onto the map because a whole area is contested. And basically walking out means you're just going to get dunked on by a whole bunch of people. So, you need tools that work against good players, people who don't just actively feed you. So, specials. So, let's talk about layering specials. You may have sort of thought about, special coordination and all that sort of stuff. Special coordination is not as simple as just activating all your specials in one go. You need to actually layer them. You need to put them one after the other in a certain way that's going to make them most effective. So, for example, a typical high-end special composition will be something like this. You'll have 2 initiation specials, you'll have a follow-up special, which is like an armor or something, and you'll have just one whatever. And they'll generally be used in more or less that order. Now, I am going to clarify. This is a typical composition. This is not every composition. This is not something that you're going to rip off and put into your team comp straight away without actually thinking about it. I know it's going to happen anyway, I just feel the need to try and clarify. So, initiation special, well, that's what we're going to talk about in a second, but the whatever special, by the way, can be either of these 2 things as well, right? So you can have 3 initiation, 2 follow-ups, whatever. And what constitutes an initiation special will change depending on the map and all that sort of stuff. This is just, again, a typical composition. Like, this is just a guideline. That's it. But they are used in more or less that order, which means you start with the initiation, and then once you've got an advantage thanks to the initiation specials, you follow up with something that's going to cement that advantage, and then your whatever special kind of just fits in based on the map and the objective. Like, maybe it's an inkjet, maybe it's a hammer, maybe it's a booyah bomb, right? Like, because the booyah bomb just happens to fit in with, like, booyah bomb's initiation, which is what we'll get to in a second here, but, it could be used in the whatever slot, right? So the point with missiles is that they're easy. They are very easy initiation specials. There's 3 initiation specials: missiles, ray, and booyah bomb. Missiles, as you can probably tell already, are the easiest ones to use, because you basically just activate them, and you point them in the direction of the enemy team, and off they go. The point of initiation special is to force the enemy team out of good positions. So you might ask, well, why can't Inkstorm be an initiation special? Well, the thing is that Inkstorm doesn't really tell you to move or die. It's more of a move at your general convenience, or you'll eventually die, right? There's no immediacy with an Inkstorm. So initiation specials are there to force enemies out of good positions. So as you can imagine, the missiles target you and they're going to land and they're going to kill you, so you better move. Stingray, there's a giant death laser coming across the map. Booyah bomb, there's a giant death ball coming across the map, right? Like, you need to move. And because these specials force you to move on a fairly short order, the way that you move is going to be a little bit disorganized, right? Like you're sort of moving reactively. You just kind of move to live rather than just taking the sort of safe approach that an Inkstorm might afford you. That's not to say Inkstorm's bad, by the way. Inkstorm's still quite good on things like TC, but these 3 specials have that immediacy that is really, really important. So, missiles are generally very quick to charge and very easy to use. By quick to charge, I mean when you activate missiles, your special media immediately drains, and you can just charge the next set of missiles. They may change that in Splatoon 3, but in Splatoon 2, that's how it works. Whereas with Stingray and Booyah Bomb, you have that whole, like, with Stingray, you're sitting there shooting it, with Booyah Bomb, you're sitting there charging it. So it takes longer to get these specials. Are missiles the best option, though? Well, to be fair, we're not going to go into that in this video, but the spoiler answer is no. No, they're not. Stingray is actually the strongest of the initiation specials at the present moment. However, on some maps, missiles are a little bit more useful because maybe there's some reason why Stingray isn't quite as good. Maybe there's too much verticality. And also, things like Booyah Bomb. Booyah Bomb is mainly a very versatile initiation special, whereas missiles are more just, you shoot them and you just forget about them, you go in with your team, right? Whereas with Stingray, you're all the way back, so you have to be active, you have to actually have a really good Stingray in order for Stingray to be as good as, like, to be better than missiles. So for most players, you just pick missiles, because you're going to do a lot better with them than you're going to do with Stingray. But we're not done. We're not done because specials, like, okay, so we're talking about all these initiation specials. What does that have to do with shooters? Well, this is the real and inescapable reason why shooters are always going to be somewhere in the meta. And it looks like this. It looks like this, it looks like this, and it looks like this. Basically, shooters make up the majority of weapons in Splatoon 2. And they will make up the majority of weapons in Splatoon 3. What that means is if you want a specific special, chances are there will be a shooter that provides that special for you. Now, that's not to say that every shooter is good. Let's look at the 96. Let's look at the Kenzaglugas. Well, that's a dually, but whatever. Let's look at basically any of these, right? It's not necessarily the case that shooters are always the best option. It's just that if 3 of your options for a Booyah Bomb are a shooter, and one of them is a Splatling, you're probably going to be picking one of these 4, which means you're basically getting a shooter, right? If you want a Booyah Bomb. If you want a Stingray, well, I mean, this, and this are all the same weapon. This and this are the same weapon, so it's actually a little bit deceptive here. But things like Sloshing Machine don't really get it quickly enough, and also it doesn't really make sense with the weapon. Flash Blast is the same as Sloshing Machine. So you're kind of left with 52 Deco, you're left with Custom Jet, Vanilla Dynamo, which, I mean, if we're talking about downtime being a problem, I mean, yeah. And we're talking about Vanilla Squeezer. When you can see the problem. Like, yeah, sure, Spike Charge is good. It's fine, you can pick it. But also, chances are, if you want a Stingray, unless you play charges, you're probably picking one of the shooters, right? Which means the real inescapable reason, beyond downtime and versatility and game speed and all that sort of stuff, is quantity. There are just so damn many shooters. And I know that might be a bit of an unsatisfying answer, but that is actually the real reason why shooters are so popular. Realistically, if you want a certain special, you're going to be picking a shooter most of the time. There's one other trap. There's one other trap that sort of cements this, which is that the main weapon matters. Now, what do I mean by the main weapon mattering? I mean anything that isn't a shooter, you're picking it because you want the main weapon's capabilities. If you pick a Carbon Deco, you're picking it because you want a carbon, right? The main weapon actually matters. With shooters, the main weapon generally doesn't matter all that much. If you swapped the kits of like the K52 and the Ten Attack, it really wouldn't change anything. You just have people picking the same weapons when they want, like, you just have people picking the new 10 attack when they want a Booyah Bomb and the new 52 when they want an Inkjet. That's all it would change. If you swapped the Carbon Deco's kit with, I don't know, the Vanilla Dynamo's kit, suddenly it changes a lot because it changes the way it removes the good Carbon kit, right? So when you're picking these sort of non-shooter weapons, you're picking from two options, because you're not picking a Carbon or a Dynamo, you're picking a Carbon, right? You could maybe argue that you're able to pick between Carbon and Vanilla Roller, which, okay, fair, but even then, right now in the metagame, Carbon is significantly better because it has much less downtime. So, and also because it has a burst combo, but, you know. So you're picking between, like, basically two kit choices, and you think about the kits that Carbon Deco has, it's basically, one of them is Autobomb Inkstorm, which is fine, I guess, and the other one is Burst Bomb and Autobomb Rush. And I mean, Autobomb Rush is okay, but it's not really this sort of game-defining special that a lot of these other initiation specials are. So instead, you're picking the Carbon Deco because you specifically want the Burst Bomb combo with the Carbon. Which means you've kind of narrowed down what your teammates can choose in a competitive setting. In solo queue, whatever, you're just going to get 4 E-leaders on your team anyway. If it's competitive and, you know, you're organizing your team comps somewhat, that means that your teammates are going to be stuck picking shooters. If you lock a weapon like a Carbon into your team comp, you now have only 3 slots to cover the rest of your team's needs. So if your main weapon doesn't come with a particularly good initiation special, or even in the case of Tri-Slosher, right? Like, Tri-Slosher is really popular and works really well, partly because it provides an armor. But even then, some teams feel the need to run an NZAP anyway because they just don't get enough armors with the Tri-Slosher. In fact, that's actually the sort of the bleeding edge of the meta right now, is to replace NZAP with things like Tri-Slosher and Rapid Pro Deco, so that you have like a really strong main weapon that also provides a helpful special in the armor. But anyway, if you pick a main weapon that has some kind of gimmick that you want to take advantage of, you need to be really choosy with the rest of your team and weapons. Which means you're even more likely to pick a shooter. So, not only are shooters your sort of de facto answer to virtually every situation because of how versatile they are, but that versatility means that if you do pick something that is not a shooter, you need to pick more shooters to cover it because of that versatility. Though to be fair, it is also funny how most shooters, most non-shooters, sort of all have the same kind of problems of like low paint and high downtime and all that sort of stuff. Something I think they're trying to fix a little bit in Splatoon 3, because the bow and the Splatana both have relatively low downtime, and they also paint pretty a fair amount. So it could very well be that this is going to change in Splatoon 3, and that brings us to, well, does it always have to be this way? So let's talk about Splatoon 1 real quick. The same thing was true in Splatoon in terms of speed, but it had a different effect on the metagame. Splatoon 1 had a huge range of viable non-shooter options, but the problem is, it's not that they were viable in spite of the things that we were just talking about, they were viable because of the things we were just talking about. Basically, they were better at being shooters, right? In terms of just getting kills. You had things with burst bomb combos that instantly killed. You had things that you had things like range blaster that could jump shot and actually hit reliably, so that's an instant kill right there. And on top of that, you also had invincibility specials. So when you did jump shot direct someone with a CRB, you had a Kraken that you could just press immediately to get your multi-kill. And because of the Kraken and the bubbles and all that sort of stuff, you needed actual instant kills as opposed to just really fast ones. In fact, that was why shooters sort of fell off a little bit in Splatoon 1, is because despite killing very quickly, none of them killed instantly, and you needed instant kills to avoid the problems that invincibility specials created. And on top of that, you also had quick respawn and whatnot, but like... also, to be fair, we also sucked. But in Splatoon 1, the same concept led to a different conclusion. It's not that shooters were somehow worse. I mean, yes, they were a little bit slower in Splatoon 1, but for the most part, the reason why we had a different metagame in Splatoon 1 is because of these factors. So that brings us to Splatoon 3 then. And I mean, geez, there's so much that could happen here. We have no idea what's going to happen with squid rolls. Now, yes, we can speculate about, oh, well, squid rolls are going to do such and such, but there's so many small aspects of squid rolls that could change the game in a myriad number of ways. Depending on how much armor you have, how long the armor lasts, how often you have to like squid roll, how many times in a row you have to squid roll before you stop getting armor, all that sort of stuff. Squid rolls could do just about anything to the game. Until we actually get the game in our hands, we are not going to know exactly what squid rolls are going to do to the game. Now, of course, when we do get the game in our hand, we will just about know exactly what they're going to do to the game. At least I will probably try and make a video about it. But for now, we have no idea. The other thing is, yeah, of course, weapons are going to be buffed or nerfed. They might revert the shooter mobility change that they added in Splatoon 2, which, yes, affected the whole shooter meta thing. But also, I don't think they're going to do that. I think, for the most part, they're going to be giving us more or less the same weapons as we've got in Splatoon 2, just with maybe some tweaks to the things that kind of suck, and then they'll go from there. We actually have no idea. Based on the squid rolls and based on other things, we have no idea what the speed limit threshold, the sort of interval that games are going to be played at, we have no idea where that's going to go. It could be some weird situation where lower ranked games are actually faster paced on account of the fact that people are less good at using squid rolls to not die, so maybe fights take less time in low level games, so things get stronger there. We have no idea. There's all sorts of weird stuff that could happen. But lower level players will be affected by these things, right? So if lower level players are good at parrying shots with squid rolls, but they aren't very good at actually hitting shots, then you could be in a game where just nobody dies, and you're in A rank, right? So there's all sorts of weird stuff that can happen. Obviously, these are extreme examples, but like there's all sorts of weird stuff that can happen, and we have absolutely no idea about the specifics anyway. The other thing, and I've alluded to this already, but maps dramatically affect how specials work. So if we've got a situation in Splatoon 2 where you need initiation specials, you have to understand that that is because of the maps. Okay? It's not because the specials are overpowered. I mean, geez, missiles are not overpowered. They're actually just, like, they are just a consistently good answer to the problems that the map presents us. As I already said, the typical setup that I went through is only going to apply some of the time. What maps do is they create requirements. The metagame does this too. The metagame tells us what weapons you're going to be fighting, and the maps tell us where you're going to be fighting them. Based on that information, you need to come up with a toolkit that is going to address those problems. Those toolkits, or those tools, are found in kits, as in weapon kits, as in, you know, Custom Jet has Burst Bomb and Stingray, right? So those are the tools that Custom Jet comes with. So when a map tells you that you need to have long-range initiation to get out of your base, and you need to have long-range initiation to bust the enemy team's defense, and all that sort of stuff, that's where you start to look pretty favorably upon things like the Custom Jet Squelcher. Now, I'm not going to go into this too much here, we might do that in a future video, but there's a knock-on effect here between maps and specials and weapons. So all of what I said about how certain specials are necessary in order to play the game in Splatoon 2, and how shooters require, like, shooters are the best way to get those specials quite often, it all comes back to the fact that the maps require those specials in the first place. In Splatoon 3, the maps seem a bit more open, right? Like, it seems like it's a little bit easier to get into these maps without needing specific specials. But we don't really know yet. It's hard to say. We still have very little information, specific information about, like, the weapons and the maps and the specials and that sort of stuff. Because, like, for example, we don't know things about, like, the tactical. Does the quick respawn effect, like, how much quick respawn is there? Does the quick respawn effect, is it cancelable by things like Respawn Punisher? Can you get it twice, right? Like, can you get the buff, go in, die, respawn, come back, get another one, go back in and die again, right? Do you get multiple attempts at or multiple tacticals, right? Like, all these things. Can the Tacticooler be destroyed, right? Like, can you just have an Object Shredder E-Leader just instantly shoot the Tacticooler, and then, bam, you don't get any special anymore, right? Like, there's all sorts of things we don't know about these specials that are going to dramatically change how they affect the game. That having been said, there are a lot of things that are fairly well fundamental to the game that are not going to change. One of those is range. Range is always going to be powerful. Is it going to be more, and it's basically all down to a balance of, is the range more powerful than the lack of power that comes with it, if that makes sense. So in other words, a shorter range weapon usually has stronger, like higher damage, faster shooting range, shooting time, more turf, lower points of special, that kind of thing. So think about missiles. Missiles, in terms of power, are weaker than Suction Rush, right? So on Muscle Forge Fitness, where you have a very short distance between your base and mid, you can use Suction Rush instead of missiles, because you can just throw the Suction Rush from your base into the middle of the map. Other maps, like Albacore, you probably might eventually want a Suction Rush to take the zone anyway, but you need the range to actually get from your base into mid, right? So there's going to be situations where the higher power is stronger, there's going to be situations where the higher range is stronger. But either way, the range will always be powerful. Also, shooters are still going to make up the majority of the weapons. You're still going to have, like, if you want a certain special, especially now we have 15 of the bloody things, if you want a certain special, you're going to be picking a shooter a lot of the time. Sometimes you'll get lucky. Sometimes it'll be a Tri-Slosher with armor. But sometimes, with a Booyah Bomb, for example, you might just have to pick K-52, right? We don't really know until we've actually seen all the kits. I'm sure they'll be a little bit more inventive with the kits this time. I'm sure they'll be a bit more generous in terms of giving non-shooters good kits and all that sort of stuff. But for the most part, shooters will be the first thing that you turn to when you want a certain special. Also, regardless of anything, it's very likely that shooter movement will still hold up very well at the highest levels of play, even with things like the squid roll. The reason for that is because when you have an option, like a squid roll, and you also have the option of just normal shooter movement at the same time, that's really, really flexible, really versatile, right? You can sort of strafe back and forth a tiny little bit just to dodge a couple of shots, or you can use your squid roll to parry a blaster shot. Like, you have the options. So you can leverage your really fast movement, or you can just parry the enemy team's power weapons, and then use the fact that even though you're in midair, you still don't really care that much about your accuracy because you can just shoot as many shots as you want, and you can just shoot them in midair and hope that you hit 33% of the time, right? Either way, there'll still be plenty of options for us to choose from. We'll be able to pick all sorts of shooters and non-shooters, and they'll probably all be viable in some... A lot of them will be viable in some regard, certainly enough to make the game interesting. Will a lot of them be shooters? Yes. Will there be other options aside from shooters? Absolutely. Is it really a problem that shooters are the only thing that are still like going to be the majority of things? Well, I mean, shooters are really fairly fair weapons, right? Like, nobody ever really complains that much about dying to a shooter, aside from maybe the K-52, right? Like, they're generally very fair weapons that play really, really well into Splatoon's mechanics. So, generally speaking, I actually don't think it's that much of a problem if we see 3 shooters in every team, right? So just to sum up, the reason shooters are really strong at high levels is because they are really fast with really granular movement, and they have very, very low downtime. On top of that, because each specials are really, really vital, and each one provides certain capabilities. When you combine the maps and the metagame, you figure out which capabilities you actually need in order to solve these problems. In order to solve certain problems, you will need certain specials. In order to use those specials, you will probably need to pick a shooter. And why wouldn't you? Because as well as being the most common weapon type, they're also pretty damn good. So you may as well pick a shooter a lot of the time, if you just want a certain special to deal with a certain situation. That having been said, everything has a really complex relationship here. It's not that shooters are just better. They're not just better. The reason you pick non-shooter weapons is for the main weapon, which means that the main weapon has to be good on the map, and it has to be good against the weapons that people are picking. So all the all of this applies to non-shooter weapons too. It's all very, very complex, and that's why people like me go on YouTube or go on Twitch and tell people how to play the video game in a lot more detail than seems necessary at first glance, right? So, all in all, are we doomed? Well, no, we're not doomed. Shooters are obviously going to be really strong. There's no way they're not going to be strong. And they're going to give you a whole heap of options. But also, you're going to be able to pick non-shooters just fine on new maps, even if you're a top-level competitive player, right? And by the way, if you didn't pick up on this the first couple of times I said it, I'm saying top-level competitive players here. That means that a lot of this stuff, you don't have to pick 4 shooters if you're playing an A rank, buddy. You know? Anyway. So anyway. Personally, I'm actually more worried for Charger players. Like, Charger players are going to have hell of a time in this metagame. Like, holy moly. We're going into a game where basically everything can be shot by a Charger, and is kind of needs to be shot by a Charger if we're being real here. Because, like, oh yeah, you got to deal with the reef slider by shooting it before it starts moving. Well, Charger, I hope you're paying attention. And then, like, the Tacticooler, like, if you can actually destroy the Tacticooler, well, the Charge is probably going to be your best way of doing that too. And then the Crab Tank and the Inkjet and the... Jeez, Charger players are going to have a hell of a time in this game. So I don't envy you guys, but you will be able to pick them. You will be able to pick them. Probably. I will probably still complain about them in solo queue, but you'll probably be able to pick them. So, all in all, Splatoon 3, it's going to be fine. It's going to be okay. We'll be fine. But at the same time, you gotta understand why shooters are in the position they are before you start saying things like, oh no, shooters are just whatever, right? Like, you gotta understand why we're in this position. Anyway, that about wraps things up. Hopefully this has sort of helped people to understand things a little bit better. And for now, that's all. See you next time.